here
Well,
too.
welcome everybody, particularly Andy Barnettson from CPI and Helen Naylor from Roxburgh Milkins. Hi, Helen. Roxburgh Milkins, as you know, are retained contract lawyers. Now, 10 minutes ago, Neil and myself received apologies from Luke Menzies from Menzies Law. They're our retained our retained employment law specialist. He's been dragged into a dismissal of a director due to gross misconduct. And in Luke's own colourful words, there's blood on the walls. So he won't be with us today, but he was one that did ask for it to be recorded so he could play catch up and pick up any questions that he may be able to enlighten us on. So can we start with the sort of normal round robin? We'll just go around the group and just get a feel for how people are faring. It's 2 weeks since we last spoke. I'm more than happy to start with my Dairy Pack hat on. We had a very poor May. We were expecting it. We were about 55% of our budget, so we were well down, and we had about 19 people furloughed at the maximum point. We've come into June with a much stronger order book, and on the back of that, we have brought one crew back on a casemaker and a couple of middle management, because we're starting to see some of our supervisors and management getting a bit ragged, those that have been working with depleted resources all the way through. So a much more buoyant order book, but a stressed a stressed workforce, which is now being complemented by returning workers. So.
Hi, lovely, thank you, Tim. Richard, Jarrett, do you want to go next?
Yeah, certainly. I don't know why it is, but we have been remarkably lucky all during this coronavirus thing. And effectively, it's been business as usual. So April was good, May was good, and June looks, pretty much up to budget. So we haven't furloughed anybody, and we don't see ourselves doing that. I think we were very lucky with a couple of new customers that we acquired sort of year, which has helped us along. But yeah, it's the luck of the throw of the dice, and it seems to have come up treble sixes for us. So,
Perfect. Thank you, Richard. And can I ask Sean Baxter if you'd give a summary?
Yeah, no, we're about 20% down, but we've been quite aggressive over the last 12 months. So we're actually only 4% down on last year. So it's not too bad at all. I think we were just very keen with how far we could push the boundaries on the sales front, I think. So, yeah, no, we're not doing too bad. We've still got 7 or 8 furloughed, but I've already made 5 redundancies. So, but that is solely down to new equipment coming in, and we've put in a lot of IT on the shop floor, so we've gone totally paperless. So we've invested to lose headcount. But June is looking probably the worst month out of the last 3. So yeah, pretty much after lead time, we're in a lot there. So we're quite nervous about June, but we'll see what happens.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Sean. Thanks very much for that. May I ask David Orr, would you be able to give us a summary?
Just as I take a mug full of coffee. Thanks.
Sorry, David, I was just... that's exactly...
Well, we've got a conventional and a display business. The conventional business has held up reasonably well. Down on last year, but we were expecting that. Not far away from it. And I sort of endorse Richard's word. I think it's damn good luck more than anything else. I guess one of the things we did was we got our workforce on site early on, and they have responded magnificently. They really have. They still are.
Anybody furloughed, David?
One who is who has to be screened, or what are they called? Protected.
Yes. Yeah.
So no. We split the shifts for 2 months, and with effect from this Monday, we've gone back to a single shift because, again, reflecting what other people have said, it was exhausting people. Coming into the office were shouldering too much of the burden, so we've brought people back, and we've gone back to a single shift at Manor, which has pretty much been greeted with a huge sigh of relief. It makes social distancing potentially a little bit more difficult, but on the other hand, people aren't moving around the factory shopping from one machine to another, so it makes it easier in another sense. Our display business has been less fortunate, but actually in relation to where we thought it was going to be, we're pretty pleased. So overall, I'm thinking our lucky stars, but we are down on last year.
Okay, thank you, David. Ken?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, for a cover box company, we've been rather fortunate. No furloughs. I was a bit negative about what might happen in May, but after about 2 weeks, it had a surge, and June has been very positive. But one of the things I have to make a note of is that the positivity has come from new work as opposed to the existing customer base. And we have, within East Lancashire and the sort of the manufacturing world, the general manufacturing world that feeds into maybe aerospace, into the wider retail sector and furniture sector, we've had over 30 companies in lockdown. So whilst we're doing very well, at the back of that, going forward and what is happening to industry in general, I think potentially has got is far more important on the economy. But so from our point of view, okay, but nervous about the region in general.
Thanks, Ken. That's brilliant. Gavin?
No, just unmuting myself. Yeah, not significantly different to last time we spoke. A variety. We've got 1 or 2 sites that have stayed fairly busy. 3 or 4 that are a fair way down, albeit May feels like it might have been the bottom. Can't be sure, but we have got an increasing number of companies reopening in some form. So I'm a bit more optimistic about June. I don't think it's going to be a lightning recovery in the sort of the more industrial sectors, but who knows?
And furloughing, do you have some?
Yeah, it's partial furlough in 4 businesses still out of the 10.
Thank you. Thanks, Gavin. That's great. And Dave Taylor?
Yeah, pretty similar. We, after a very poor start in May, it sort of ramped up the second 2 weeks, and we ended up around 85%, 90% of the budget. June seems to consider in that vein, and we're remaining quite strong. Little bit down on one of the sites, mainly due to sort of the furniture business that they normally do is in lockdown at the moment. We've still got 4 people furloughed. We had a number, I think we had about 10 or so furloughed before a couple of weeks ago. They all came back. We're now running to full shifts. 6 salespeople that are furloughed at the moment.
Great. Dave, thank you very much. Dan Graham?
Hi there. Yeah, not dissimilar to other people. May was not great. May was quite a bit down. I think we were about 40% down, and then year on year we're about 20% down. Just down to 1 shift from 2. We've got about 30 people, just under 30, 28 people furloughed, which is about just under 50% of the staff. But June's already looking really good, much better than May, and forward orders are looking positive. So like Gavin said, looking much better. Hopefully it is the start of something, but not counting my chickens just yet.
Brilliant, thank you, Dan. And Peter Marsh?
A bit different to some of you, really. We had a very good May. We beat last year. but June's gone a bit quieter, a bit like Sean, really. Order book's just gone a little quieter. I think a lot of our customers were absolutely mad busy and possibly overstocked, and then kept topping up in May, and then I think now it's sort of maybe we don't need this amount. A couple of customers have started coming back, having shut completely, and so obviously we're getting a bit of business there. We do supply into the medical supply industry quite a bit, so that's probably what's kept us very busy a bit. I think what Richard said, a bit luck, to be honest, as to who your customers are. So one or two are absolutely flying, but they, I think, have just gone quiet because of their stock levels were so high. So June is looking average, but May was very good. We have only got one person on furlough. That's sales-wise, because really they can't really get out there and do much. A couple of you referred earlier to the workforce being a tad ragged. I would agree with that. You know, we've been working very hard, and I think it's been quite stressful for them. So it's managing the workforce is quite a task. I mean, it's a task which is very achievable, but you can see the strain in them. That's about it, really, I think. But yeah, I mean, we're a bit quieter now, but we've been very busy. Yeah.
Peter, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Nick from CAPS. There you go.
So like many, we've sort of about 20% down on our budgets for the year. A number of our customers had to shut down at some point over the last couple of months, including one of our main customers who had to have a complete factory lockdown for 3 weeks. We do supply a number of key businesses which help to offset some of this. But as many have also said, June is looking a lot better for us now. We had about 20% of the staff on furlough, but we've now put in plans in place to return about half those to work over the next few weeks. So yeah, we're sort of optimistic now. We've come through the worst of it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nick. Ben from Westbury.
Hi guys. Yeah, that similar sort of pattern really. May actually finished stronger than we thought it was going to. Excuse me. And June started relatively well, honest. We've brought back about half the production guys that we'd furloughed. The office guys that furloughed, that's being done by various sort of the management team, if I'm honest. I think the issue for us is if this sort of second spike or whatever else does happen, what happens in terms of if people go back into lockdown in terms of payment, etc. I think that's probably a bigger fear for us at the minute than maybe looking too far ahead in terms of how good sales might be. We'll see. Overall, we're happy. We're pretty pleased with where we are. Yeah, we're just waiting to see what the next sort of 6-8 weeks bring.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. Your internet connection's a bit
woeful.
Yeah, a bit ragged, but we got the gist, I think. Thank you very much for that, Ben. That's good. And Barry Lill, please. Old Lill package.
Yeah, so for us, all our customers are e-commerce. So for us, it's been non-stop demands up. We're actually in the opposite position where we just physically cannot keep up with demand. Everything we make, customers take, and they still want more. So we did have to shut the factory for 2 weeks due to a suspected COVID outbreak. So that gave us 2 weeks with no staff on site, with just me and my brother to sort out the factory so that it's all set up for 2-meter social distancing. So when everyone returned, we're kind of better than most supermarkets now. So yeah, we got the only people we had on furlough were those living with people at risk or on the 12-week high risk register. And those that are still on the high risk register, we've only got 2 of those. They're still furloughed. The people living with people on the at-risk, we actually, because we are now so clean and everything is 2 meters distance, we said if you do, you've got to return to work, otherwise you're unpaid. And we're now to say we're actually also recruiting to try and keep up with demand.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you very much, Barry. And that's it, Tim. Everybody's spoken. And so everybody, unless we'll come to Andy and to Helen in a second.
I was intrigued by what Barry said there. That I wasn't aware that any of our members had actually been forced to close due to an outbreak. Was it a single individual, Barry, that was confirmed as having COVID-19?
No, it was last week of March, first week of April. So it was before the government were able to do any testing, and before we'd all really started treating it that seriously. And it was one of our shift managers. So they were, because they overlap with the previous shift and the next shift. And at that stage, we were all sort of not doing the 2 meters distancing because that hadn't come in yet. So they had been within 2 meters of more or less everyone within the factory over the past week, and showed all 3 signs of having COVID. But so we sort of had to shut because we were effectively a household because of the distance everyone was from each other. But there was no testing that could be done at that time. So it was just something we had to do and see if symptoms occurred. And after 2 weeks, he didn't have any further symptoms, so we brought everyone back.
So nobody else on your staff displayed symptoms in that period. That was very fortunate.
Yeah. So there's basically like a 100-strong household.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've done well to manage that, and I guess there's been a bit of fortune there as well. It does sort of lead me on to my next topic, which I wanted to speak about, and this is the test and trace system. There has been some confusion about it. It was track and trace. There were 3 words used originally. It was going to be app-based. It's worth talking about it because to clear up some of the confusion at this moment in time, it is still a manual system. It's a telephone hotline, if you like, and you talk to a trained operator if you display symptoms and are tested positive. So there is no app at this point. It may or may not come at some stage in the future. But it's worth just clearing that up because some people I've been speaking to earlier in the week were still concerned that it was an app situation and that the phones would have to be banned from the workplace, etc. So it's worth talking a little bit about that because it's worth painting a scenario that perhaps one of your employees comes back from furlough, starts having some cold-like symptoms, goes for a test, is tested positive for COVID-19, and then makes a call. He makes a call to one of these 25,000 trained operators and shares the name of everybody he works with. And then you're faced with a situation not dislike Barry's, but rather than one person showing symptoms, you could have all your employees phoned and told to go home. So it's worth talking around this area. And if anybody has any experience of their employees having been tested, that would be most helpful to share, because there's some confusion about whether you do it at home, whether you go to a drive-through, whether there's capacity in areas or not. But I think where I'm going with this is we probably need to get some guidelines out. So when your employees return from furlough, or you can talk to all your employees about the procedure for going for the test, what you do if you get a positive test, and to remind them to make a list before they make the call of only those people they've been within 2 meters distance with for a protracted period of time over 15 minutes. So that we get some common sense here, because none of us want factories closed because there's been a mass exodus of workers because they're all at home isolating. So I throw it open to anybody who's got any experience or questions or comments here. David, you've got your hand up there. You're on mute.
Yeah. As I understand it, if you get a call from one of these track and trace people, they don't know who's given your name. And so you're right, Tim. There is a possibility that you could have a complete factory closure. And I see this as potentially us against the government. This is potentially quite hazardous and dangerous. We've given some serious thought to this, and we have decided on the following: that if anybody is called by the track and trace service, we will, and we're informed of this, we will tell them that they are not under a legal obligation to self-isolate. It is being listed as a civic duty. If we will ask them to go for a test. Now, one of our production managers felt bad at the weekend. On Saturday morning, he had booked and had a test by Saturday evening, and he had the results the next day. So it's pretty slick. And he tested negative. We will ask them to go for a test. We have a policy whereby we pay people 75% of feeling ill well. We will pay them that until the tests come through. If it's tests positive, we'll pay them, continue to pay them 75%. If it's negative, we expect them to come back to work. If they choose to stay at home, they get SSP. Because we can't tell them to ignore the government's advice. We can't even start to tell them that. But what we can say is that if your test comes up as negative, there's no reason why you shouldn't come back to work, and therefore, if you choose to stay at home. And I think that's probably the strongest message we can give. I mean, there's very little in this that is in our control, but what we pay people is one of them.
Yeah, and to be mindful of that differentiation or that difference between statutory sick pay at £95 a week and being sat home furloughed at 80%. It's a disincentive to hold your hands up and say you're poorly, especially if you're working from home. So,
Tim, there are other considerations. First of all, there's a GDPR consideration here, because you're giving people's personal details. Secondly, how do they know how to get hold of some of these people? I suspect they'll ring the factory and say, you know, Mr. Manor Packaging, you're under an obligation to put this man on the phone right now. That's the only way, certain way. Gavin, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add a bit of, we have got some actual experience. So like you, getting people tested hasn't been a problem. Since the new regulations, we have one person tested, and all they've had was a text asking them to log in to track and trace. So that was the way it was followed up.
Did they?
Not as far as I know yet, but we're waiting to hear back and what then happened from that. So to the best of our knowledge, they weren't actually approached the other way around. I think the other thing, David, that is very challenging is the tests, of course, are not perfectly reliable. And there's quite a lot of evidence from what I gather. I don't know if anybody else listened to more or less this week, but that getting a negative test doesn't mean you haven't got it. So I'd still seriously think about taking the view that if somebody is symptomatic, then I wouldn't be encouraging them in, even if they've had a negative test. But your call.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Gavin. And I think that the best practice here is if they've got symptoms that could be COVID, regardless of whether their test has been negative, to implore them to stay at home, but also be mindful that statutory sick pay, unfortunately, will get them back to work sooner than you might want them back to work if they are actually carriers or have the illness. So, it's a tricky one. It is a tricky one.
Yeah.
Richard?
Yeah, we had one fork truck driver who self-isolated for a couple of weeks because one of his family members, I think, actually got it. And we had a chat with him and we said, look, before you come back, you get a test and it's clear. So at the end of the fortnight, he went and had a test and it came back positive. So we told him to stay away for another few days. And he went off and had another test and it came back negative and he's come back to work. And initially getting the first test, this was probably about 3 weeks ago now, it was a huge palaver and it took a long time and booking and all that sort of stuff. The second time, we had a test station down at Bristol Airport. He drove up without a booking. He just turned up and they saw him pretty much immediately. He had the test, he got the results in a couple of days, he was clear and he came back to work. And so we've taken the view now, because it's only going to affect us for people that are in that sort of situation. It's going to be very small numbers. But if anybody has been away and wants to come back, that they do so with a negative test.
You say it's only small numbers, but it could explode if they just say it's the whole factory.
We talked to the staff about it. We talked with the chat, and everybody's on board. So it was good for morale to actually talk it through with people and tell them what we're doing.
Yeah, I read an article this morning where there is some, although testing has been scaled up dramatically to about 200,000 capacity a day, the accuracy of the tests now has gone downhill because you are effectively doing the tests yourself, either at home or in the isolation of your car in a bubble with someone looking at you with a hazmat suit through the windscreen. So there are a lot of people who are concerned that they're not doing the swabbing correctly because they're doing it themselves and medical practitioners aren't doing it for them. So again, just beware of negative test results. If there are symptoms, don't just rely upon a single test done by the individual. Please make sure you would, before testing was available, keep them in isolation for at least a fortnight until the symptoms have gone, unless you get repetitive negative tests, of course. Okay, Andy Barnetson, we spoke a little bit about test and trace yesterday, and we were talking about potentially getting people tested before they return to work. We sort of came to the conclusion, I think, that we would ask BEIS whether they could give us any guidance on this, because clearly the capacity for testing outstrips the demand for it at the moment. Is that something that you are comfortable to ask BEIS?
Oh yes, we will ask them. The official line at the moment remains you get a test if you have symptoms. For the workplace environment, it's different if you're in household. But the requirement is if you show symptoms. And to my knowledge, government isn't currently allowing for that spare capacity to be given over to your colleagues who may be coming back to work as a precaution. However, as we've heard already, there is some evidence that in practice it's possible. If you turn up to a testing station or just go ahead, and if there are staff on site who have the capability, then the test may be available to you in practice.
Yeah, we did actually have someone on the call yesterday who'd gone down without symptoms to a local test centre and was seen straight away and got the reassurance that they were clear. So maybe it's a local thing, all to do with accessibility of the testing, rather than something that BEIS can give us guidance on. I don't know.
That's certainly been our experience in more than one place.
Yeah, there's a huge gulf between politicians' formal statements and the medical staff on the grounds who actually have a very different viewpoint.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah. Can I ask a question of the group? There aren't too many people on this group who've got large numbers furloughed. I think myself and perhaps West Coast and a few others have got significant numbers furloughed. Has there been any reticence to people returning to work? There certainly have been a couple of cases that I've spoken to out of my employees who are shielding at the moment, and even when the 12 weeks are up, they're not comfortable coming back. Has anybody else in the group got experience of reticence to return to work?
All of ours were. So all of the ones that are out on furlough, especially where they're protecting, they're shielding loved ones. So whether that's a husband who's on the critical list or a child, they were terrified of leaving the house. But actually what we did was then invite them in to come and see the factory and have a tour round of the factory in its new working practices. And having then seen the factory, they were all happy. I think the problems a lot of the people had was just the fear of the unknown. It's been so much in the press that this is a killer, it's invisible, you walk outside your door, you will die. They have just had that for 12 weeks, and to actually get them out into the public areas again, and see that actually they can work 2 meters away and it's all set up for that. They were actually then really quite happy and just said, okay, I'll be back tomorrow after their tour.
Dan, have you had any conversations with furloughed staff about the potential of returning to work at some point? And have you had any pushback?
No, at the moment, I'm not looking to bring anybody back. I've spoken to a few just to say, keep them up to speed with where we're up to. But at the moment, I'm not looking to bring anyone back. So I haven't really had that conversation.
Okay, thanks for that. One of my questions was going to go to Luke Menzies, and in his absence, I can't ask the question, although we will email him the question, is what can employers do about employees who longer term are still refusing to return to work? What sanctions or what things can we put in place to either force them or to resolve the situation? So Neil, would you mind making a note of that question? So that we can actually ask Luke to make comment on that, because it's becoming quite an issue with a few members now. They've got key people who they want back, but they're just not comfortable to return.
Tim,
Ken, sorry.
We've had a couple which we've said on the several meetings, that the ones that aren't probably your best employees, that won't cause you grief, they're the ones that are pretty much refusing, or not refusing, but not that keen to return back. And we've basically took the stance that we're giving them we've given them 3 days notice that we will ask them to return to work. If they fail to return to work, they need to prove to us that it's not acceptable to ask them back to work. So i.e. get another doctor's note, or we'll take disciplinary action as if they're refusing to come to work, full stop.
And of course, they would then go from being furloughed to statutory sick pay if it was a doctor's note. So it's a further incentive for them to reconsider coming back to work.
We've had, sorry to jump in, we've had similar issues to a point. No one's refused to come back, but we have had a couple when they've come back, all very keen and, oh, thank goodness I'm back to work. I've really missed being at work. Remarkably, the oh, I've got a bad stomach line turns up, and absence hasn't been an issue at all with the guys that have been there the whole time. And I think, like Sean said, it is the guys that you know you can't rely on. I think we've been talking about it. It's quite interesting that this is probably going to force our hand more than anything that's happened before in terms of how we look at who we employ, and how we employ them and what we will tolerate. And you know, we've let stuff slide in the past because they've been there a long time and blah, blah. And actually now it's like, you know what? The future's going to look very different for you guys. We're just not going to tolerate it. So we have lost one already on the back of that behaviour. And we're hoping that will remedy it elsewhere. But, you know, I don't hold too much hope, to be honest. And I think that there'll be many more that will go, sadly, because they haven't sort of caught on to the need of the business and I guess the country as a whole, really.
Sort of self-selection in many ways. Ken, you wanted to drop in there?
Yeah, I'll try not to go too in depth on this, but interestingly enough, just listening to I've been on a Zoom call this morning with a series of people, lawyers. Jack Straw was on there, and there was a gentleman from Germany. And the focus by the lawyers and the HR is really, in the UK, is all about what we're going to do. We're going to have to be less vigorous with the employees, take on board more and more of what their requirements are, and very much really focusing a lot more on the individuals and their requirements than what we hitherto would have done. Which Ben contradicts, I suppose, slightly, but that's what was being pushed by all the lawyers and HR people. Interestingly enough, the guy from Germany, he came and he's made the speech and said, do you know something? In the UK, it's incredible. all you guys are so focused on the individual's responses, on the individual's opinions of what's going on with this or that and the other. He said, I work in Sweden and Germany. He said, that is not the case. It doesn't occur. They are told by the government put guidelines in place. It just automatically happens. There isn't this personal consideration for the individuals. They follow the rules, and therefore the rules are just go through. So we have a different intriguing concept that's maybe coming along, which I found quite remarkable, that we're going to focus on the individuals and what they want within the HR and with the legals, and Luke Menzies will be able to comment on this, but yet maybe in other parts of the world it's coming differently, and we might end up going in different directions.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, that Ken. I wonder whether that might be because we are a bunch of privateers. We're family businesses. We're small entrepreneur business where we have a very, very close relationship with our employees. And perhaps the group you were talking to this morning may be more industrialized or more larger public enterprises, perhaps.
Yes, and into, shall we say, rather than manufacturing, more office-based service sectors and all that, and that's really where it's coming from, definitely.
Tim, the rules are set by employment law, and there is a catch-22 in employment law, because if someone withdraws their labour, we as employers are entitled both not to pay them and ultimately to dismiss them. They also have a right to withdraw their labour if they perceive themselves to be in imminent danger.
Correct.
I mean, that is a lawyer's feast.
Yeah. Because
there isn't an obvious way out of it, and the really clever ones will play that line.
Yeah.
So it'll be very interesting to see what the lawyers say about it. I don't know if Helen's qualified to talk about this, but
no, it's not my area. I wish I could, but
but I see it as a real trap.
Yeah, it's going to be. It's a shame Luke wasn't on this call, but maybe we'll pick up on some of these points and have an interim call so that we can all understand the best practice here. I'd like to ask a question of Andy Barnettson. He's on the call. Andy, you've done some great work with BEIS with regard to exemptions for visiting engineers and technicians from abroad. Can you just bring the group up to speed with that? Because although we mentioned it in last week's supplier call, there will be people on this call who it's relevant to. If you've got overseas machinery which requires special servicing or technicians from abroad, can you just mention to us the exemptions that are in place for that?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So it won't have escaped anyone's attention that we've got the 14-day quarantine coming in if you fly into the UK. It's been controversial, but we'll come to that in a moment. In terms of exemptions, I've circulated a note that you should all hopefully have seen. If you haven't, Tim can forward it to you. There is an exemption for service engineers. If you've got people coming in from abroad to service your machinery because it is in danger of grinding to a halt, then those service engineers are exempt. We've also circulated a guidance note with sample letter, so it explains what you need to put into the letter that the person flying into the country needs to have in their possession for UK border controls. So assuming it goes ahead, assuming the quarantine does come into play, as has been suggested by Home Office, the exemption stands for service engineers coming in from abroad. Complications are British Airways has been very vocal in their objection, the Department for Transport has been very vocal, and we now have a situation where Home Office and the Department for Transport are actually in conflict. Priti Patel at Home Office is very keen to push it through, but we're already hearing suggestions it will be wound down quite quickly. There is no reciprocity in other countries. If another country decides to impose a similar 14-day for political reasons, you might find that your Italian / German / Swiss engineer would have come into the country because they'd have had the exemption here in the UK. But if they're told nationally, no, they're going to face 14-day quarantine when they then return, which might be imposed solely for political reasons, then they're still not going to come. So the exemption I mentioned is only on entering UK, and if there is this tit for tat action from other countries, we still may have a problem. But we've raised that to BEIS, government is aware, so we hope to avoid that.
Is there anything else you're asking BEIS for clarification on at the moment, Andy? Is there anything that that you could do with some input from this group?
Yes, we've got a couple of questions. Just before that, on the subject of furlough, again, I've circulated a note, I think it's gone around to Sheep Plant colleagues. You'll be aware that the furlough system is changing. Chancellor has announced the stage process. You'll have a greater responsibility as employers through July, August, September, and then the furlough scheme comes to a close end of October. The immediate date you need to be aware of is that with effect 1st July, furlough is closed to new staff. You can't put anyone into furlough from 1st of July unless they have previously been furloughed for a 3-week period. And that means you've got a deadline of 10th of June. If you want to be able to furlough someone after 1st of July, they have to must have been furloughed for 3 weeks before that, which means they must be into the furlough scheme by 10th of June. Again, notes circulated. It's also in the BEIS daily updates that go out by email, and I know Sheep Plant Association is circulating those. So that information very much in the public domain. To Tim's question, what does BEIS want to know? Well, first question is on that furlough. How do you feel as employers about the staged wind down of furlough? If there are any comments on that now, or you want to put to me by email, happy to take those, and we'll consolidate those to BEIS. And the second question is on social distancing. 2 metres minimum at the moment. If government was to make it a mandatory minimum of 1 metre, would that make a difference to you economically? Would you be able to demonstrate greater efficiency, greater profitability? Would you have more staff on site? Would it bring you any positive benefits from a business point of view? So again, as long as we've got time, happy to take any thoughts on either of those. Impact of furlough winds down and possibility of social distancing going to 1 metre. I'll take any thoughts now if we have time, but do email me at any point.
Yeah, that last question's a sticky one, isn't it? That's where economics meets medicine. Yeah, I don't know how on earth you put a value on that, because you've got to counter it against the increased risk. And the risk from 2 metres to 1 metre is massive difference in risk of transmission. So, and David Orr, you had a comment to make there.
Andy, if I may, you kindly mentioned that you produced a sample letter. Received that. How's that been distributed?
Well, I hope that's gone out. I do a first circulation to what I call corrugated sector, and Tim and Neil should both be on that circulation.
David, it's been sent out.
Are you going to forward it?
David, it's been sent out. It's on the daily posts from the SPA, so it's on our website, the SPA website. So all of that information is available. If you haven't got it for whatever reason, I can resend it to you, but it's available from the website, and we send out on the dailies. So 2 days ago, I think.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
On the social distancing, I think 2 metres is so much easier to manage than getting close. We've taken the view that, like on the back of die cutters on gluers and things, we just run as fast as we can with 1 person, and we don't have 2 people there. I think you get to that case, if you get down to 1 metre, actually that metre won't be a metre, because the 2 metres I think is generally 1.5, but you can see the gap. And I think if you narrow that down, I just think you're encouraging it just to disappear over time.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I think what we'll do is we'll put those 2 questions out, Neil, to our members specifically in an email, and we will encourage them just to answer those 2 questions, and then we'll collate the information and get it back to you, Andy, if that's okay.
But related to that is also, I guess, what the HSE's position is on the 2 metres. Has there been any thoughts on HSE descending on businesses and shutting them down if all staff aren't kept 2 metres apart? Because that's one of the key factors in all of this.
Is the question also relating to obviously the gradual lifting of restrictions, because they're going to, at some point they're going to have to either go, you don't need to be 2 meters apart, or now it's 1 meter, and then eventually. So is it part of the stage process anyway? Because obviously, like we say, sooner or later people are going to have to come back to work, and sooner or later the government's going to go, okay, the risk of catching COVID is decreased so much. You can be closer. It's not that higher risk anymore.
I guess the context of the question is important here. Is this a theoretical answer? Can we be more efficient if we're working closer together? Or is it a more specific question about right now, would it make a difference to the way you operate if you could restrict it to 1 meter? So that the context and the time for implementation is quite critical to answering this question accurately.
Sorry, can I come back there? I dropped out briefly, so I may have missed some of what was said. But Tim, your point, yes, please do put these questions out to all SPA members. Gladly take any comments. We don't have a lot of time, but my next discussion with Bays is Tuesday morning at 9. So anything I have by close of play Monday, I can put to them verbally, but there's always the opportunity to provide details by email after that, and I'll do so. Tim, if I can copy you with a question from Bays themselves, then you know the exact context of the questions they're asking. I'll do that straight after this call.
Fine. Thank you for that, and we'll get as many responses as we can for you, Andy. I'm conscious of the time. It'd be good to move on. We're very fortunate to have some legal people with us today. We have Helen from Roxburgh Milkins here. Helen, can I ask you, you may have to sit a little bit closer to your microphone because you were quite weak earlier, but can you just give us a flavour for what your clients are asking you for, what COVID-related issues they're having at the moment? That would be very helpful.
No problem. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, good.
Great. Perfect. So not much change in terms of the trends that we've been seeing and that we've spoken about before, but the same sort of issues around customers and potentially some suppliers claiming force majeure to say that they can't honour the contracts, or they're going to be delayed in that. And again, that's not always going to be the case. That's going to be depending on the contract, and it's going to be quite rare that inability to pay is going to be a force majeure. It's something to have a look at and really sort of get to the bottom of why they're saying that, and it could well be just funding issues or trying to save or hold off paying for longer than they need to. So on that, what you might see is, and you might have already started doing this, agreeing payment terms, either deferring or spreading out payments. And I suppose on that point, that is a variation of the contract. You don't have to agree to that, but obviously in the spirit of getting everyone to get through this together, we are seeing a lot more of that. Key to try and get it in writing. Obviously emails back and forth are great. Letter countersigned is even better. And I think particularly what we might see is a wave in maybe autumn, when everything hopefully is a bit more back to where it should be, where parties are going to argue that when they varied those terms back in lockdown, those should be going forward for the rest of the term of the contract. And if that's not what you're intending it to be, if you just want it to just be for lockdown or for a specific period of time, you need to be very clear about that. If you can. So something that we've done is we've set specific periods to say, this deferred payment is only till the 1st of July, but the parties can agree in writing to extend that and keep it rolling like that. Obviously, if you're negotiating any contracts at the moment, take a look at the force majeure clause, make sure that's going to cover you. And and you're seeing more and more now that people are specifically referencing a pandemic. And yeah, that's the main things. Oh, something else we've noticed more recently is government loans have started to hit banks. So in more positive news, we are noticing people are in better positions to start paying bills, and hopefully you'll start seeing the same if you're getting any difficult customers not paying yeah, that's the main things we're seeing at the moment.
Okay, thanks for that, Helen. It did come up on a call earlier in the week that if you haven't gone for your civil loan yet, now is a very, very good time to do it. Not only are the banks saying yes to pretty much everybody, but they're processing it very quickly. So the best time to go is actually now, if you haven't done it already. If you want a war chest, which you can pay back in a year's time, if you haven't touched it, then now is a good time to do that. I read an article last night, and I don't know the ins and outs of it. I'm going to have to take some advice on it, but I understand that trade credit insurance has now been underwritten by the government, backdated to April the 1st. Now, we've had a couple of bad debts since April the 1st, and our insurers have been loath to pay out for various reasons. So I need to work out what that actually means, and does it actually only cover people who have trade credit insurance in place, or is it a scheme that recompenses anyone whether they have insurance or not? I've not done the homework on this yet, but I wonder if anyone in the group has.
Tim, my understanding is that it is a contract between the government and the insurers to stop insurers running scared. In 2009, a lot of businesses, Woolworths included, were basically scuppered by the credit insurers because they basically all behaved like rats leading the sinking ship. This is stopping them doing that, and it is actually, I think, really clever by the government because it's guaranteed it's unlikely to be called, but it will actually stabilise the credit insurance market. But it does. If you don't have credit insurance in place, it doesn't help you.
Okay, Ken.
Yeah, just to follow up on what's being said, we have had notification from the credit insurers, and that have been saying that yes, there has been the government funding, and the details are all forward. So it's all about credit insurance, and they did point out that's because the credit insurers were running shy. They were running away. So it's to support industry and credit insurance just to maintain some sort of stance. Yeah.
Okay, well done, the government. Yet again, done something very positive very quickly. That is good news. I'm conscious of the time. We have about 5 minutes to burn up. Does anybody have any questions for either our experts or our audience? I can see that RH Fibre Board are keen. Who's going to ask the question from there?
Yeah, all it is now the majority of our customers are back open. And I've been quite surprised, certainly in the last week, about the number of customers that are sort of indicating that they'd like us to come on site and look at various things across the board. Some of them are for inquiries and some are for box machine erecting issues and stuff like that. Now, as yet, I haven't sanctioned any of my staff or myself to go anywhere, but I just get the feeling there's a little bit of laid backness about it, and about the expectation is slowly coming in to do that. And I just wondered if anyone had sanctioned anyone to go off site for meetings, and if so, what they've put behind it.
Yeah.
Anybody got any
Yes.
data on that, Ken?
From our perspective, we are allowing people to come on site. We just maintain its sanitisation as they walk through the door and the distancing. But we are visiting sites and sites are visiting us.
Yeah, I mean, on site, we're fairly stringent on what we expect, so that's not an issue, but it's more when we're going to elsewhere. We're sort of gathering information from various places and trying to formulate some sort of policy, but as yet, it's not been strong enough in my view to warrant.
This came up on the call last week, I think, with suppliers, because what you have to do, unfortunately, is dance to the tune of your customers' health and safety system. So you'll probably end up having a stock of protective clothing in the boot of your car, and you dress appropriately to their rules. It's interesting with regard to people visiting your own site. We're not a massive disher out of PPE at any time. But once we start inviting people or accepting people to site, we're going to have to insist that they wear some protective clothing, just to reassure our staff that we're not bringing risk into the factory environment. So does anyone else have any recent examples of having visitors or having visited
the team, the thing that we've done is requested their risk assessment and everything, but they've been so poor.
Yeah.
You just go, we're not coming on site. If that's how they're behaving on that site, we've just said it's not standard.
Yeah.
And Steve was asked to go last week, and we just got what they did, and it was just literally be careful.
Yeah.
And it's just not good enough, really.
No, I guess most things can be done remotely. If push comes to shove, it's just a matter of sooner or later you're going to have to let people out, aren't you?
See, the other thing we're worried about is it'll be the new bad back syndrome, that I was asked to go visit, or this wasn't done properly, these wasn't done, and that's what we're worried about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Anybody else got any comments on that point, or any other questions? We've got a
Nick
couple
from
of minutes.
CAPS.
Yes, I was just interested if any sort of COVID-19 protocols for employees involve temperature checking. A few of our employees who are currently on furlough that we're trying to get back have sort of highlighted this to us. Obviously, they're quite hesitant at the moment. So I'm just wondering if anybody is doing this, or if anybody sees any benefit at all of it.
Yeah, Nick, we've done it from the start. As soon as we were able to source an electronic thermometer,
Yes,
we've done so, and we've been doing that. Other businesses that I've been involved have actually used temperature sensors off a corrugator to scan everyone as they come in the front door. So
that's the kind of things we've been looking at as well. Yeah.
So yes, we've done it from the start. People are used to it now. It's fairly inexpensive, inobtrusive to do it. I would recommend it.
Okay, thank you.
But just, we were looking at it. If you're looking at it for bringing people in who don't want to come in, as one of our people who used to live at a boarding school will attest, you can give yourself a temperature if you don't want to come to work.
Yes, no, yeah. I mean,
So,
we've got people. Yeah, but even things like cycling into work, we've got a lot of people cycling to work, walking to work.
Yeah.
You know, it can sort of create sort of false negative things. So yeah, just interested on
what
on
you
feedback.
then do if they're then showing that temperature, then sending them away for a test. They're not then back for 3 days while they get the test. and all the rest
Exactly,
of it. So yeah, it's quite a. So we looked at it, got the thermometer, but then decided actually it's not viable and have left it in its box.
So if anybody wants one, there's one for sale.
Yeah. Tim, just to remind that the Westfield Healthcare proposition that we've got has got this guidance about, you might find that people are giving XYZ excuse for reason A. So I wonder if we ought to signpost people still to the possibility of this.
Yeah, I think the anxiety of returning to work will bring up all sorts of false reasons for not attending, false illnesses, false complaints, all sorts of noise around the main issue, which is I don't want to be at work. So we just need to be mindful that an objection isn't an objection unless you've heard it 3 times if you're a salesperson. I can see Steve Gabell going, yeah, 3 times.
3 or 4.
Okay.
So, Tim, there was one other thing. There was a theme at the beginning, which was sort of ragged staff, ragged managers. I wondered whether that was worth just a bit of airtime, or if we've covered it.
Yeah. I mean, my own personal circumstance, we've got a guy he's our production manager. He's been working very, very hard and manning machines, as other people have mentioned on this call, in the absence of full crews, trying his very best to get what the customer wants under very difficult circumstances. And he's just run out of gas. It's simple. And he's starting to be quite emotional, not being able to see the bigger picture, reacting very, very abruptly to tiniest of problems, because he's just got a bag of shit that he's carrying around with him, and that's another bit in there. So we have to be mindful of our employees, and we've insisted that the guy takes 2 weeks off. It might actually turn into 3, and we've brought someone back to cover him with a slight crossover. So please do look at your long-standing or long-working crews and managers, supervisors, because if they are your dream team, don't bust them, don't break them. Just be very, very mindful and give them a break. They probably deserve it.
I guess the other bit to also watch out for is those working from home. We had one salesperson that almost had a breakdown just for being effectively lonely and always working at home and always connected to work.
Yep.
So we actually brought her back into the office for 2 weeks, socially distancing in the factory. But she was then fine because she had contact with humans again. So we sort of had to override government rules, but had to for mental health reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a very fair point. We were on a call yesterday and there was some advocacy for continuing to work in isolation or work from home going forward because it's the new great way of working. And I was quite vocal saying, well, actually, it might be possible, but it might not be the best way of working. Some people get tremendous well-being from being around colleagues, coming to work, the discipline of getting to work and coming back from work. So we need to be very mindful of people's anxiety levels, whether they're at work or not.
Yeah, Peter.
I
Peter Marsh.
would echo you there, Tim. We're actually probably going to bring 2 people back next week because I think it's not just the stress of Corona, but it's the stress of what else is going on at home. And I think they're very much missing being in a work environment. And in fact, they're sort of saying not being in work is stressing me out. So we had a meeting yesterday with the directors to consider starting to bring some people back. It's obviously going to need to be managed with social distancing. But I think, okay, we're in Bootle, so it's slightly different. But the stresses of what they are incurring at home is I think, a factor which we're having to consider in getting them back here to some normality in life.
Yeah, there is something else which impacts on the ability to do that, and that is schools opening. We had this conversation on a Zoom call earlier in the week. Some schools are just doing reception years. Some schools are trying to get back and open, but a lot of people's decisions on whether they can come back to work, unfortunately, are linked to the ability for their children to go to school safely. And if they can't, then there may be a reticence to return as well. So it's good to get people back to work, but not everyone will be in the same situation domestically, I think. Yeah, so talking to your furloughed people, very, very important. I've been doing it sort of every 2 or 3 weeks and getting a feel. And they do fall into 2 camps, those that are desperate to get back and those that don't want to come back at all. They're very, very comfortable in their own little domestic bubble. So, yeah, thanks for that, Peter.
Tim, just to pick up on one thing from a previous Zoom we had was this idea of managers cascading the conversation. So a manager or even a supervisor talking with somebody about something like this, rather than it being the managing director talking to everybody, help to just keep the situation at the right level and keep people assured. So I think there was the approach that management might take to this, just cascading the dialogue.
Yeah, I think you're right. If you've got a large workforce, you might have 100, 150 workforce. A phone call from the MD might be a bit, whoa, I've not spoken to him before. We're quite fortunate. We've got a small crew. I've known them since they were left school and they've all been with us 20, 30, 40 years, whatever. So I have no problem with dialogue with them. I know them all. But you're right. If you do need to get some sensitive feedback from your furloughed staff, then their immediate supervisor would be the best person to make those calls and filter information down, but also filter emotion back up.
Yeah, my battery's just about to die, so if we disappear, I do apologise. But
how's your phone though, Paul? Sean.
Carry on, Sean.
Basically, one thing I wanted to ask was the 5-star audit. If you're due an audit in the next few months, is there any plans to extend that?
Yes, you will be given grace. I think we've decided as a committee we will give people up to a 6-month grace period. So you don't need to dress the place. Don't worry, Sean. We'll give you 6 months, and the good news is it saves you a bit of money that as well. You get 6 months for nothing. So there you go.
It's a good question, Sean, and Tim and I are meeting with the committee about this whole thing about while we're in lockdown. These Zoom calls are obviously new things that we've been offering, but what other things perhaps to help you while we're in lockdown, and as a member, what benefits as a member. So it's a great question to have asked, and it's been on our mind.
And whilst we're talking about SBA matters as a whole, I think it's important to say that we won't be meeting again in person for quite some time. So it could be a year or maybe 15 months between conferences, which is a first for the SBA. So just to reassure members that we are working on a webinar, which will probably coincide with the October date that we'd set for conference. So we will be having a 1.5 or a 2-hour webinar where an awful lot of the content that we were hoping to deliver over the 2 council conferences can be addressed. So we are working on that. It's new technology to us. It's a new format to us. But we're not just accepting the fact we're not going to have conferences. We will be doing our very best to deliver something electronically.
And just to pick up a show of hands, I mean, as Tim said, October, if we had that, those people who would be interested, show of hands? Everybody, excellent. Okay, good, lovely. Thank you for that. Thank you for that support. Thank you, Barry. Thank you for your thumbs up.
Excellent. Well, Ken, you got one point to make?
I just got a point that's maybe a positive note in the midst of all the stuff that's been going on, that comes again from this conference call this morning, which there was a focus at some point that actually the government is going to put an increased focus on manufacturing within the UK, particularly with this idea that over many years we've just been buying the cheapest thing we can buy from the Far East. The government are actually focusing on that and saying, guys, we've got to stop this for certain industries. Pharmaceuticals or things like PPE, lots of other stuff, but it would appear that the government is rallying round and trying to move it that way. So good news for the years to come, hopefully.
Yeah, it would be nice to know whether we could bring back the manufactured in Great Britain or bought in Britain or made in Britain logos on things. I'm a great advocate of them. I had to congratulate Nuttles earlier in the week because they'd done some wonderful artwork on a box, which was a hand-scribbled Union Jack, and it looked fantastic. It brought all the right emotions to the fore.
There speaks the Brexiteer.
Well, there you go. And perhaps it's something as an industry, with the help of CPI, SPA, and others, and maybe some government backing, we can give our support to something which clearly marks what's been made in Britain and attaches some kind of pride to it. That would be great.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay. Well, if nobody has a burning question, we'll have a quick. Anybody got any final questions before we finish?
No, thanks.
No. Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Very, very constructive call as ever.
Yeah.
If you have any colleagues who you think would benefit from this content, then do let Neil know, because he'll be able to email you a download, and you'll be able to watch this in all its finery. If you'd like to see how you performed yourself, you can do the same. So, okay. Thank you very much, everybody. And God willing, we'll see you in 2 weeks' time if everyone's up for that.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Very good.
So
Lovely.